Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Show and Tell. I'm Billie. I can be found on Ravelry as billiotoy, Billietoy, and on Instagram also as billiotoy. Today, I'd like to share with you the anatomy of a vintage sweater, a 1940s sweater. But you'll remember from last time how I spoke about my love for vintage and my love for accessories. So I wanted to show you this handbag. It's not vintage. It sort of has a carpet bag kind of flavor to it. But this bag was purchased a couple of years ago. The last several winters, my husband and I have been going to South Florida to visit his parents who live there year-round. And I discovered this fantastic antiques festival that takes place in West Palm Beach in February. And the woman who was making these fantastic handbags had such a beautiful variety of them available for sale. I could have bought her whole booth, but I limited myself to one. I also have purchased vintage jewelry at that fair. Not the same year as this, but let me see if I can get that. But I bought this vintage pin a few years ago. It's French, marcasite. And the reason I'm showing you all this jewelry is I do like to coordinate my knitwear with jewelry, preferably vintage if I can. These two little pins, which ironically were the only two pins in the store like this, and they happened to have my initials. So as my mother used to say, they were winking at me. And they're Art Deco, my absolute favorite period, as is this ring. So I had to have these and this bracelet. So these are all things that I'm going to accessorize my project with. Now, the project. Back in January, when I was at Vogue Knitting Live, I met the woman who's importing Sandnesgarn from Norway. And my project is knit in sisu, which is a very affordable workhorse of a yarn. My colors are, I think it's light petrol and dark petrol. So sort of like an eau de Nil color, and teal bordering on forest green, hence the green French Art Deco. These are actually reproductions using antique molds. These were done in the 1980s, but made to look like they were in the 20s. So the yarn. And I wanted to show you the pattern because the pattern is, from my experience, my limited experience, rather unusual. I hadn't seen too many vintage patterns before. This one is authentically vintage. And bear with me while I get my screen share up here to show you this. So I don't think that this pattern is still under copyright. I'm not going to divulge too much that's personal, but I mainly wanted to show you how patterns used to be, not like the 20-page monstrosities that we encountered today with charts and schematics. This has nothing. It has this picture, which leaves quite a bit to your imagination. You don't know what's going on in here. Is this the back? Is this the front? What is that? How is the sleeve set in? There's a collar. We don't know how that's attached. This seems to be a lapel. The buttons look like they're knit, which it turns out they are. And this pattern also comes with a skirt, which I'm not making, but all the instructions you need to make this outfit are encompassed in this page, and half of this page. that's it. So it's a far cry from what we have to work with in contemporary patterns. Another thing that's absent from this pattern is sizes. It's knit for one size, 34-inch bust. Hello, that's not me. So I had a lot of improvising that I was going to have to do here. And I don't put myself in the category of expert knitter, so this was a little bit of a stretch for me, but that's how they tell you get to be a better knitter. So I attempted to go forward because I really love the look of this particular garment. So, how much yarn to buy? Lucky for me, in January at Vogue Knitting Live, I had purchased sisu in a different colorway, and I already had experience in knitting with that yarn. So I was able to knit a little swatch, maybe 50 stitches by 50 stitches, so that was 2,500, and I saw how much yarn that took, and then I was able to figure out per stitch how much yarn I was going to need. But how many stitches are in this garment? I don't know. So what I did was something that most of you will freak out about because it's fairly analytical. Let me get my other image up here on the screen for you. 1 second, bear with me. I created an Excel spreadsheet to help me figure out how much yarn I was going to need. So I started, let me get to the top of this. I started over here with, as the instructions flow, with the pocket facing and the patch pocket, and then the front right, the front left, the back, the sleeves, and so on. And there are a lot of parts to this garment. And I recorded how many stitches were in each row and how many rows repeat there would be. And then I tabulated the total number of stitches. And I went through row by row, line by line of the entire pattern, figuring out just how many stitches using my gauge, not their gauge, because I was certainly using a contemporary yarn, not the 1940s yarn that they were using. And I came up with the total for all of these different categories, and I separated the light color stitches from the dark color stitches, and overall it came out to be 34,000 of the light color and 66,000 of the dark color. And I calculated based on that little swatch I had told you about. I knew how much each stitch took, and I knew the yardage of each ball of yarn. So I was able to tabulate that I needed 3 balls of the light color and close to 7 balls of the dark color. And let me tell you, I came out with exactly the right amount. This is all I have left of the light color. So I hope that you may find this somewhat interesting. It's a really great tool to have in your bag of tricks if you want to calculate how much yarn you need, and if you have cockamamie antique instructions. Okay, now let's have a look at the garment. Let me see if I can get it here in the picture. Okay, this might do. Okay, so here we are at the collar, the lapels, these top little, sort of like a fake pocket, doesn't go down anywhere. I have not yet sewn on the patch pockets, which will be down here. But the reason I'm showing this to you before it's assembled is I think the assembly is very unique, and the whole pattern was an experience for me. So this particular pattern is knit, as all classic things, bottom up. And it started with this 1 inch of the light color. No dark color is cast on. And let me try and clarify. This is the front. So the front is two-tone. There's a panel of this second stitch, which, by the way, in the very beginning of the instructions, they tell you stitch 1 is regular stockinette. Stitch 2 is this unusual ribbing. It's almost like a little 2-stitch cable. You take the second stitch and pull it over the first, and then you go back and knit the first stitch. And it makes this nice vertical line, and a lot of the sweater is knit in this motif. Anyway, so you cast on this little hem, and after you block everything, then you can fold this hem up, and it makes just a crisp, beautiful edge. Here's the outside of the garment. Look at how it hangs, like almost as if there's a weight in there, and it's so crisp. I mean, I really, really like that, and I might even incorporate it in some of my contemporary things if they don't have a ribbed lower edge. As you knit up, you're adding on this extra vertical bit, which gets folded back and mitered in the corner. But this runs all the way up parallel to the buttonholes. I haven't stitched it back yet. I wanted you to be able to see a little bit about the construction and how it's so different from what we do today. Now, at the same time as you're knitting all the stockinette up, you get to the waist, and the instructions call for an opening because there's a belt that will eventually go through here. There's no instructions for a knitted belt. I probably don't have enough yarn unless I buy another ball to do it in the light color. I'll see if I maybe want to do it in the dark color, but any belt will fit through here. And let's see what else. So as you're going up, you do that belt hole, and then the underarm, and then you're done with the dark color. You're just knitting light. You get to this, you add this piece on, and then you come up to the shoulder and you reintroduce the darker color. So it's very, very unusual in that regard. Oh, and by the way, above the top buttonhole, you start increasing to make a lapel. So that's folded over, stitched down. And at the very, very top, there was an unusual piece that I'd never seen anything like before. There's a little teeny tab here that was about 6 stitches by 3 stitches in a kind of funky shape. I don't think you'll be able to see it. It's too small. But after I knit the collar, I found that it butted up perfectly against the collar. Now the back is rather a conventional back, all one color, regular shape, nothing special there. But the collar was a little bit tricky because the instructions didn't tell you which way was the outside or the inside. This collar is also folded over, so I left it unstitched so you could see. The first time I knit the collar, this being the back of the sweater, I picked up the stitches. I had the purl bumps facing out because I didn't know that this collar was going to fold. And I also didn't know that it was going to fold this way and not that way. So I had to frog a little bit, not so much because it's not that big a collar. But that also makes for a very nice piece of fabric that's got some body to it. So it was challenging, but I think it was such an interesting project that really, really pushed me. Now, the sleeves we haven't talked about. the sleeves are also done in that pattern. Let me give you a little close-up view. The sleeve shape was also something I had never seen before. It had these two prongs at the top, and the instructions tell you to knit this side, sorry, not knit, to stitch this side to that side, so that top edge to the other top edge, so they'll be kind of rolling into one another. And then connect the inner part of that to this bound off edge in between. So I interpreted that to be this. I took those two notches, stitched them together, and then took the inner side and stitched it to this. Now, this is not what we typically see in a shoulder. Normally, what we're seeing is something flat. This has a third dimension to it. So I made myself a mock tailor's ham to see how this shoulder would sit. So if that were my shoulder, that looks pretty good, except I do have some extra fabric here. So I wasn't sure if it was meant to be sewn in like this with the garment meeting it here, butting up against it, or if this was meant to be turned under, as if to give it like a little bit of a padded shoulder, like a built-in shoulder pad. So I tried it a couple different ways, and I did determine for me, because I have a fairly narrow shoulder and somewhat of a sloped down shoulder, that I could use that little extra bit of lift in there. So I have basted in the other sleeve, and it seems like it's going to be okay. After this whole garment is assembled, I will revisit it in a future episode. But for now, I wanted you to see, again, the anatomy of a 1940s, really vintage, authentic vintage sweater. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's a little different from what I will more likely be doing going forward, but I thought it was worth taking that little adventure with you. I'd love to hear your comments. If you have questions, please put them below. If you like this episode, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want to hear about future episodes, don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Bye.